welcome to the Veterans Commissioners NI podcast, the podcast designed to give veterans a platform to tell their stories and explain what it meant for them to serve in the British Army. Delighted today, joined by Charlie Marno. Fantastic to have you here, my friend.
Commissioner.
Great to have you here. And you're going to be one of the first people that we've interviewed and heard your story, so hope you enjoyed the experience.
Thank you.
So first of all, where were you born?
I was born in the RVH in Belfast, but I was brought up in Dundrum, just across from Ballykinler training camp.
Okay. And what age were you when you decided to join the British Army?
Well, I was looking to try to join up from 16, 17. Obviously I couldn't do that, but whenever I turned 18, I joined up then, much to the annoyance of my mother and father, I have to say.
Yeah, I think many mothers and fathers were perhaps apprehensive about their sons and daughters joining up. So before you went into the military, any standout moments from childhood or any?
No, our family had a very good upbringing in Dundrum, and great memories of the people in and around Dundrum. Everybody worked together, played together, and some fantastic memories through until today. Obviously my brother and sister, and my mum and dad, and my grandparents, all from in and around there. Well, my father's from London, but the wider sort of family is all in and around there.
So what made you join the British Army? I'm sure it was a time. What year was it when you joined?
86.
86. So the troubles were ongoing. What motivated you to join? What was the Ulster Defence Regiment then, in a time of conflict?
And it was the height of the troubles, I would say, right in the middle of the 80s. My sister had already been in the regiment and serving out of Ballykinler. But a lot of my mates in and around the area were joining her up. And it was a wee bit like the PALS battalions of the First World War. You know, we seen friends and family join up. We thought we'd do the same because all we wanted to do was bring a bit of peace to this country. Yeah. As simple as that.
And on back in your sort of genealogies, any people serving in the wars or?
Yeah, well, obviously my father's national service, and one of my uncles was national service. He thought he was going to follow my father into the Remy, but actually he ended up as a Royal Green Jacket, light infantry. So that was a bit of a shock for him, I have to say.
I can imagine.
But one of my other uncles, then, he was part of Monty's forces coming up through Sicily and Italy. Wow. And so on and so forth. And
must have had some stories to tell.
Absolutely, and you know, he actually came across one day. He said, "I need to get for his miniatures an MID," and we never ever found out what that MID was for.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Was he one that I know many veterans struggled to tell some of their experiences and stories, and others were okay with it?
I think he did, because you never really got much out of him in relation to what he had done during the war. He was a very private man anyway.
Yeah. You mentioned your sister joining up, so would it have been unusual for a woman to join up back in the 80s? Did she join, was it also Defence Regiment,
yes.
Was it Greenfinch or?
Yes, she joined 3 UDR in Ballykinler, and done her time on the ground, but then she became a chef, you know, so, and then she finished after that. But I think one of her biggest traumas was a couple of friends of hers had been blown up at Burn Bridge, just outside Castlewellan in 1980, right. And that affected her quite badly.
Mm-hmm. So where did you do your recruits course?
Ballykinler.
Ballykinler. Mm-hmm. Some stories can be told about Ballykinler over the years.
Yes,
and a fly on the wall in that camp.
Don't even go there.
Over the decades.
and to this day, I can still hear at 10 to 5 in the morning the stones being thrown on top of the roof of the billets. I can still hear that, yeah. And then, you know, and that was your wake-up call, yeah. And then you're off for a run. So,
so what was it like then in terms of? I'm sure it's a lot different recruits courses back then. I joined in 88. I'm sure not that long before me, but compared to recruits courses now, mm-hmm. and back then, what would you say were the main differences that you can identify?
I would say the language sort of would certainly be very different today. There's no doubt in that there. But yeah, it was a much harsher sort of regime, mm-hmm. As it would be today. But you know, you just got on with it and finish the course. And like each of those courses in and around that sort of era there was 80, 90 soldiers joining up the Ulster Defence Regiment. That was a regular permanent Carta course of numbers. So you can just see right across Northern Ireland that PALS battalion ethos coming back out again, no doubt.
Yeah. One of the things that I always see the big difference is in health and safety. If you go back into the 80s and you know what recruits were asked to do, told to do, versus the way things are now with the understandable environment that we have, things are very, very different in terms of then. But then soldiers didn't know any better. No. You know, society was what it was back then. You know, you had 9 people in the car that succeeded 4. No one ever thought any of that. Yeah.
The word diplomacy didn't really come into it.
No, definitely not. Weapon handling and all of that was a little bit different back in the 80s.
Just a tad.
For sure. So just in terms of Ulster Defence Regiment, we want to unpick your journey. We want to maybe try and get a little bit into your mindset as your service, you know, went along. But even just as a high level, as you look back, and I'm sure you're not mind me saying, probably your very best years in terms of physical fitness are maybe just behind you, even though you have many more years to go, I know. But looking back now, what did serving in the Ulster Defence Regiment mean to you?
I think it's the whole friendship, the camaraderie, which lasts through to today. I have one guy in particular I speak to every single week, but it doesn't matter where I go in the province and further afield sometimes, I'm still meeting people that I've served with throughout my whole years. And you just can't get away from that. And to have that, as I say, the camaraderie and friendship, there's nowhere else, no other occupation would have that, because everybody knows what we all went through. Yeah. And it is when you try and explain to people who have not been in the military, and probably the most I could liken it to would be maybe high level professional sport, where you have a group of men or women depending on the sport, but you know, the term going into battle on the sports field obviously pales into insignificance to what soldiers you know go through, but just that environment of being on a purpose with a group of human beings, all committed to the cause, looking out for each other, you know, all aiming for the same thing, and then see how people react in the times of difficulty, obviously in the military side, danger and all of that. It really is, I call it the ultimate environment to test a human being. I think it's combat. Would you agree? I would agree. There's no doubt in that, because you didn't really think about it certainly then, but every time you went out through that gate, you know, and certainly if you speak to the wives and partners of the serving soldier, male and female, certainly in our environment, they didn't know if they were going to come back in. It's as simple as that. They lay in bed at night time wondering, am I going to get my husband back? Am I going to get my wife back? Because many of our soldiers, or many of our patrols had female greenfinches on the ground, and they were no different. If the Land Rover went up, they were going up with it.
It's a really good important point that you make, and I sometimes have this discussion over the years with our particularly regular colleagues from England, Scotland, Wales who served here, and of course, you know, many of them have got harrowing stories, experiences they've been through. However, for most of them, when they went back into a barracks at night, or when they finished their tour, they went back to their home. I think sometimes they didn't appreciate what it meant to be an Ulster Defence Regiment soldier, and you're never off duty.
No.
24/7 danger, 24/7 looking over your shoulder, looking under your car, wondering if you know that person coming down the street or whatever the case may be. That takes its toll. And you mentioned the families, Charlie, and I want to really sort of dig into that a bit, because again, very often that's overlooked. And you mentioned there, and even in your own circumstances, maybe people that you knew, just how difficult was it for wives and children and parents, as you say, almost every night wondering, will my loved one come home?
It was extremely difficult for the wives, because many of them, and I would absolutely say many of the wives will suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder today because of what they had to live with throughout the service. You know what I mean? Many of our soldiers carried personal protection weapons, and I'm sure and certain, but I can only speak for myself. I trained my wife how to use my 9mm pistol, because if I went down, she was going to have to pick it up and go with it.
Well, what was that like as a husband, having that conversation with your wife? Was she willing to do it? Was she apprehensive? But was
she was willing
necessity?
To do it because she knew it was a necessity. That was real life because of where we lived. It was one of those factors. You know, you just sort of halfway waiting on it. And she had no issue in learning 9mm training tests.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's really weird. You know, there's nobody else in the British Army would have went through that. No other partner in the British Army would have went through that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How weird is that? It's just not normal. But the wives and partners had no choice.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. I mean, I never served in that banner. I joined the old Royal Irish, as it was, 4th Battalion TA up in Oma, but never an operational role. You did some escort duty to and from Ballykinner and McGilligan, but the thing I can liken it to is, I remember when we came out of Iraq in 2004 for the last time, and just the apprehension of being on the flight line, getting onto the Herc, you're sitting on and you're wondering, you know, we're going to get taken off or not, and kind of knowing that if there was going to be something happen, it's probably going to be on takeoff in terms of you know, a missile, and then you're up, sort of still going along, the red light's still on, still in theatre, and then just the light turns to green, and I wasn't expecting it. I can just remember this. It's like someone just taking 1,000-pound weight off my back, that you're actually now out of Iraqi airspace. And I can remember that lifted, but for you guys and the Greenfinches, you had that burden on you 24/7.
Correct. And you can equate it to, you know, to today. Well, during Iraq and Afghanistan, the wives being left back home hadn't a clue what was really going on, because you couldn't. You're not going to tell your partner.
Yeah.
And that makes it even worse, not knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
Is my partner laying in the sands of Iraq and Afghanistan, or is my husband going to come home tonight from the patrol in South Armagh or East Tyrone or Belfast or whatever? It's the families, and people, organisations forget about the families. But without the families, we wouldn't have been able to do our job. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. You mentioned forgetting. What would your thoughts be around sort of the narrative that sometimes gets told now in the press and about the troubles and maybe about who was to blame and those sort of discussions that very often happen? You know, as you look back on your service, you know, how important is it that the true story of what happened in that banner is told, particularly to a young generation? Have you any thoughts on that?
Nobody can deny that there's bad apples. You can't deny that. But certainly for me personally, the men and women that I served with did so to make this country a lot better than what it is, what it was then. They had a passion to do that. You know, it's just very difficult for people to understand that because of the narrative that is put out there at the moment. You know, many of our soldiers were extremely compassionate towards the general public out there, and making sure that they were safe, they were comforted. You know, even as much as some of the guys used to carry wee teddy bears in their webbing, because you get a screaming child and you give the child a wee teddy bear,
it could make all the difference.
It makes all the difference for that child. Yeah. So the trauma doesn't continue at that particular moment. A lot of the guys would have done that. You know what I mean? And you know, we certainly have one very prominent Republican politician who wouldn't be here today if it hadn't have been for one of the soldiers of the Ulster Defence Regiment.
See, that's a story that doesn't always get told. No. There's a narrative that there was, you know, somehow this, you know, conspiracy, and that there were, you know, all these what you might call state forces acting together. But you've just alluded to the fact that an example that you're aware of, where an Ulster Defence Regiment soldier saved the life of what you might say, you know, an enemy person.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. And there were very different circumstances in those days. You know, it was an extremely difficult and volatile environment up and down the country. And yeah, very, very difficult for the security forces as a whole, and I bring the RUC and the PSNI into that. And it's, you know, it was a very difficult environment.
So can you recount, and we're going to move on to sort of life post that and what you're doing now, and I know you're making a significant contribution to the veteran community and the work you do, but we'll come on to that. Any sort of key incidences that you want to recount, or situations that you found yourself in that you'd like to share?
Actually, numerous incidents because of the volume of patrols and operations that we had, everything from Land Rover patrols to company operations to aviation, etc., etc. The volume of work just kept on coming. You didn't really have time to think. You know, it's only probably really now that you actually sit back and recall some bits and pieces, especially whenever you're sitting down with all their comrades and having a bit of a laugh and maybe a beer, for those that partake, of course. But, you know, just somebody said, "Oh, I remember that," and you do recall that, and, you know, sometimes you think to yourself, how in heaven's name did we ever get through that? But we did. We all pulled ourselves along, and we just went through day after day after day of operations, constant operations, and the volume of them just kept on coming. I suppose for me, one of the biggest things that sits in my mind was probably the 4 guys in our company who got blown up in the Ballydugan bomb just outside Downpatrick. And that was in one particular landmine explosion. It was a 1,000-pounder. And I remember sitting on the site that night because we guarded it overnight. And to this day, I can still remember the wee trickle of water, because it was a culvert. The bomb was put in a culvert. And I still remember to this day that wee bit of a river flowing down through that. And the crater was 30 foot deep, you know, 50 feet across. And the Land Rover was blown into the field.
Where were you when you heard about that incident and realised it was some of your fellow soldiers?
Myself and 2 other veterans were in a court case with a Republican, and we didn't hear about it immediately then. It wasn't until we got back to camp we heard then. Of course, everybody was deployed. There was aviation coming in and out and back and forth. And so personally, I sat on it that night with my section to guard it overnight.
The
incident site, yeah.
Okay, and I'm assuming you knew
I knew all the guys. I served with all of them. And brave men. You know, one of the guys in particular I served with on Op Granada, which was the boat going up and down the coast of Northern Ireland with the Navy and searching all the sort of boats going back and forth. And he was a top bloke. They're all good men. And it was easy to say that, but they were. You know, the commander in both vehicles, professional, in the whole patrol, all good men. Sadly, there's one of them now who's not with us. He's passed away.
In terms of morale, again, you hear so many stories about, obviously there's the hurt and the pain of losing a fellow soldier, but it is a conflict. It is a, you know, inverted commas, a war. I know that's a controversial statement, but that's for the purpose of this, it's a war. Did that galvanise you to go back out and do your job? You know, the various range of emotions, are you able to sort of speak to those?
To a man and woman, nobody had a second thought. Right, let's get back at it. Let's get back at it.
And again, that I think speaks to the professionalism of the, you know, the soldiers, that they had that degree of professionalism and getting back out there again, knowing the danger, but it was a job to do.
Absolutely.
I spoke to an Ulster Defence Regiment soldier just last week, who looked me in the eye and he said, "Look, David, if we hadn't have did what we did, this would have been another Bosnia. Absolutely. This would have been ethnic cleansing, disintegration of society." You know, he without doubt believes passionately that the role that they played actually maintained a degree of normality, if you can call it that, through the Troubles. But would that be something that you would sort of agree with?
Absolutely, I would. Because without it, as you've already alluded to, it would have turned into another Bosnia, there's no doubt about it. And in certain areas, you almost had that.
Yeah.
There was ethnic, and you could easily argue, there was ethnic cleansing in certain areas of Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah. But it was the men and women from those areas that came out, put a uniform on, and went out day and night to try and stop that.
Yeah, yeah. So before we move on to the sort of conflict part, how important is it that our children, our young people, the next generations understand the troubles and know what you and your colleagues went through?
I think it's very important in terms of the whole conflict. No matter what way you look at it, I think children of today need to look into it and don't go with narratives that are being put out there. Mm-hmm. Look into it properly and study it and see how and why it got to where it was, so it doesn't happen again. Yeah. But they also have to understand that, as we've already said, without the likes of the men and women of the Ulster Defence Regiment, Royal Irish Regiment, and all the rural battalions coming into Northern Ireland, because we quite often can be very insular and not remembering them, and the RUC and the PSNI, without all those people, then this would have been a very different picture.
Yeah, okay. So what was your last day in service?
My last day in service was in May 2007.
It's actually the same year. Last time I was in proper uniform, 2007. That's when another name change came to the at that point.
And the only reason for that is because I fell ill.
Right. Okay.
I had got to Regimental Sergeant Major, commissioned to the rank of LE Captain, and then I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
Right. Okay.
And that was a game changer.
Yeah. So that was really the predicate for leaving then.
Because I'd already looked at with my commanding officer. I'd spoke to him about going to one Royal Irish, and the Rifles was the other one on the book at that particular time. But as I say, then I was diagnosed, and that was me. Exit left.
Right. And up to RSM of the battalion. So that's the best soldier in the battalion. Well, the Regimental Sergeant Major.
I just sort of fought my way to that point.
Well, you got there. Doesn't matter how you got there.
But I always maintain this. I was always blessed through the different, because as you go through the ranks, you're taking on different appointments. But I've always been blessed with a good team. I suppose I reflect back on the time as Operations Warrant Officer in Portadown. So we covered North Armagh. And the team that was in there, the Ops Officer himself, top bloke, but the team that worked with us. Obviously the troops on the ground, they were second to none. Absolutely second to none. And I do. I was very blessed throughout my career to work with some amazing people. And that's probably where I am where I am today.
So you then left in 2007 with some health challenges. What was it like, inverted commas, going back into Civvy Street, not waking up every day, putting a uniform on? Did you find that difficult? Was it okay? What was that?
I had quite a long period of, initially it wasn't too bad, but then I got hit with a relapse from MS. Okay. So I had quite a long period, and I've spoken about this before, quite a long period of difficulties with mental health and physical health because of it, because it ended my career. I didn't know I was going to be in a wheelchair. All those sorts of things, and then the problems with the MS itself. So I went through quite a period of issues with my own mental and physical health, and I do talk about that on a regular basis, just to hopefully help people to be able to discuss their mental health, especially. Yeah,
no, that's so important, and obviously one of the key roles of the Veterans Commissioner's Office is around welfare and health. So, was there adequate support network for you? Did you feel as if the military at least were able to assist you through that difficult time?
They did. Well, it was down to me to reach out. Absolutely, it was, because all these organisations can't be on top of everybody. Absolutely not. So it was up to me, but it did take me a wee bit of time to reach out for a bit of help with my mental health. There's no doubt in that, but and it was there. It was definitely there.
So in terms of your current role, I know you're very active still within the veterans community. You want to just describe your current role and what that entails?
Well, it came about, because I eventually got a bit of work very light work with Tesco, and I got to the point where my missus says, because through my issues with the MS, I was going out into the garden, and she could see that every time I was in the garden, I came back in again, my mental health had improved. I spent quite a bit of time in my mouth and nose, but that's by the way. But a job with Defence Garden Scheme came around as a coordinator, and I put in for it and got it. And at that time it was sort of linked to the Northern Ireland Veteran Support Office, which is now gone. But you know, if it hadn't have been, you know, my link with that office and the work that I'd done with them, probably has set me up to where I am today. And that, you know, was definitely a tip of the hat to Liz Brown, Fiona, Sinclair and Jeanette, brilliant team, and what they brought to the veterans of Northern Ireland was something very special. And I was a navigator in there, so joining people to people, people to organisations, organisations to organisations. So I was able to sort of tap into all these organisations around Northern Ireland, and again, a tip of the hat to everybody, because every door that I pushed, it was open. It wasn't an issue, and everybody was more than happy to help. And I do what I do now in terms of, because the VSO's office is gone, so I'm the national coordinator for the whole of the UK in relation to Defence Garden Scheme, which is a horticultural therapeutic programme for veterans, service leavers and their families.
Yeah, I know it's a role you're particularly suited to. I know from everyone I've spoke to, all speak very, very highly of you.
Thank you very much.
Our paths never really crossed until the last few months, although I believe you did when you were part of Training Wing up at the depot in Ballymena. My younger brother Ian, through his recruits course, you were one of the instructors.
Yes, it was in Ballykinler.
Ballykinler, was it?
It was indeed. That's going back a few years.
I think it was what, 1991, I think.
Something like that. So it was quite a wee while ago. But yeah,
so
good boy.
You're partly to blame, or else take the credit for the souls that he turned out to be.
Yeah, that'll teach him.
Well, he had plenty of fun, because he was also Defence Regiment first of all, then went 1st Battalion overseas, Royal Irish, and then left and joined what then was 2 Royal Irish. And then got called up, mobilised to go to Iraq in 2003. So that was, he walked into getting mobilised in Chilwell, and one of the guys from the battalion was behind the counter, spotted him, so he was whipped out of the TA and straight back into, I think it was B Company, back in with his lads. So that was that.
A good boy.
But and obviously the training wing's important to obviously turn soldiers out, you know. But so in terms of life at the minute, you're feeling that you're contributing to the veterans community, and sort of happy as happy can be in terms of where you are in life. And as you look back, any sort of key takeaways, any experiences, what would you say to a younger Charlie starting out his military career? Any takeaways?
Do it all again, but do it slightly slower.
Slightly slower.
You know, but yeah, I would do it all again. In a blink of an eye, I would do it all again. It is, you know, there's, what is the saying? There's no finer nor more honourable a profession than that of a soldier.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. So, if you could leave a message to your grandkids or a generation sort of 3 from now, what would a message you would leave them about serving the Ulster Defence Regiment and serving in Northern Ireland? What message would you want to send them? You're
living in certainly in a better country now than what it was during my upbringing, and be thankful for that. Be thankful to the men and women that went out every day and night to ensure that actually the way you live today is certainly a lot better than what I did.
Charlie, I count it an honour to be able to interview you.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I look forward to speaking to you in due course.
Absolutely.